So we are, right now, at this very moment, at a cultural tipping point in the United States. Gen Y is soon going to eclipse the baby boomers in terms of sheer size, and this has a lot of implications for our culture in the United States moving forward. We know that Gen Y, or millennials, are an extremely skeptical generation. David Brooks wrote an article about 2 weeks ago where he cited the fact that 40% of baby boomers trust other people. The number is 19% for millennials. Only 19% trust others. Very skeptical. They are also very fickle. Yet we also see in our research that they are super engaged when it comes to brands. Why is this? We believe at GfK that not only are we in the midst of a cultural tipping point, but we are in the midst of a brand renaissance. Today is actually a very good time to be a brand. So if you think about the products and services and the brands that you have relationships with, increasingly they are disposable, they are digital, they're not really tangible. And we're seeing an increase in the intangibles. So brands that provide us not necessarily ownership, but access. So it's perhaps not surprising that we're seeing, just in the last 3 years, a 10-point increase in the number of Americans who say that they always buy products and services from a brand, a trusted brand, pretty significantly in a fairly short period of time. So we're seeing that our brand relationships are changing, and indeed, I think our whole notion of what makes a relationship is changing, and this is being led by Gen Y. So let's take a look at what exactly is a relationship. If we could play the videotape.
We're also risking a lot with the possibility of starting a family or keeping strong friendships. I've lived in 6 cities or something like that since I was 18. And as a result, I have friends all over the place, but I don't have a tight group of people right next to me. But those sorts of risks are paying off.
So 6 cities, friends all over the place, but I don't have this tight circle of friends really close to me. This, I think, is very indicative of Gen Y. And is it indicative of Gen Y just because they're younger? Or is it something fundamentally different among this generation? So we went back and we looked at our information and our data 15, 20 years ago when Gen X was about the same age that Gen Y is today. So we could see, is this really just the values that we're seeing? Is this driven because they're younger consumers, or is there something fundamentally different going on? And what we see is there is really something fundamentally different going on. So we looked at the top values of Gen Y and Gen X when they were the same age. And what you see is that enjoying life and having fun are significantly more important to Gen Y than they were to Gen X than when they were the same age. And I think that kind of comes through loud and clear in that little clip, that it was a really, that young man talked about fun and enjoying life. Another value that really pops for Gen Y is authenticity and being true to self. Whereas when Gen X was the same age, it was about having that close circle of friends, and it was having freedom and autonomy, so a very different value set. What does this mean for relationships going forward? I want to share with you 3 ideas about relationships. And the first is the new tribe. And the term urban tribe or tribe was really coined in the late 1980s to describe Gen X. And it was really about Xers living in kind of friendship circles and roommates. And it was very much tied to place. Today's new tribe isn't about place. It isn't about place at all. It's about social. It's about connected. It's about very public, and it's about highly visual, and it's making those connections with each other, not linked to a specific geography. The second idea around relationships is that community doesn't have to be that tight community right around you. It can be a community half a world away. And many of you may have seen this public service announcement that came out from Save the Children a few weeks ago. Extremely powerful in making a connection with people and a community that may not be very close to you in terms of proximity. And lastly, with brands, we have new expectations of brands. Brands are giving us something to kind of hold on to, and in some ways we're willing to give them the benefit of the doubt or a pass. So this example for JetBlue I think is a really good one of a brand that might have had a failure, but we still have that relationship and want to trust them. Yet on the same time, we're seeing that our expectations of brands are rising. This is very interesting. World Housing came out within the last month kind of replicating the whole Tom's shoe model of buy one, get one, and taking that idea and branding it in an entirely different sector, in the housing sector.
What Kathy just said about a forgiving relationship with JetBlue sounds very familiar to a lot of us, I think. Because as marketers and as consumers, we know that people often connect with brands the way they connect with people. And marketers have used that understanding to deliver emotionally and socially compelling brands in order to build their business. But we at GfK had a question. Can we take that essentially qualitative approach of relationships, which is very deep and rich, and can we turn it into a quantitative framework that will give marketers a tool to literally measure and manage their brands? We didn't know if the answer was going to be yes or no. Was that possible? So we did a great deal of research across global regions and across hundreds of brands. And what we came up with was, in fact, a quantified framework of consumer brand relationships. Some of you may have seen this at a GfK session yesterday. We've got strong relationships such as close friends or guru, at-risk relationships such as a conflicted love-hate relationship or even an enemy, and weak relationships such as a casual acquaintance or even a stranger. These relationships we saw from our global research are literally universal. So someone, for example, in Shanghai who says, you know what, your brand really feels like a close friend to me. Well, when they say that, someone in Madrid or in New York is going to understand exactly what they mean, because a close friend is a universal human relationship. So that's great, and it's very helpful diagnostically to understand how to market our brands. But then the question becomes, well, so what? I mean, is it actually predictive of business success? So what we did next was some extensive validation work. And what we found and what we were able to demonstrate is that there are specific relationships that are predictive of strong market share. And as well, there are specific relationships that are predictive of high price premium. So that's great, because now we've got a quantitative framework that gives marketers a platform for long-term brand strategy. Because don't forget, relationships don't disappear overnight. They provide a brand with long-term strength. And marketers can use this in addition to more traditional tools, such as brand funnels that focus more on near-term brand performance. So anyway, what does all this have to do with millennials, with Gen Y? Well, during all of this research, we found some fascinating learnings about how Gen Y relates to brands. And they are a little bit different, a little bit special, unique, and important. So I'd like to share 3 of these with you. What we found, first of all, was that Gen Y has more intense relationships with brands than the older generations. This is not just because they're younger. This is also because they've grown up in an environment that is media saturated and brand saturated. So as marketers, we can use this passion to have brand advocates of Gen Y consumers, and they will be natural, passionate, and sincere advocates about your brand to peers who are less engaged with the brand. A second learning, and this is very interesting and very important potentially, is that Gen Y actually feels very similarly towards brands as their boomer parents. Now, they're more passionate, but when you look at a Gen Y and their parents, you see that they actually feel either, positive or negative towards a brand. And one of the reasons for this is that, frankly, the baby boomer generation, and I speak for myself as well, have been very doting parents. That relationship is very tight. And so marketers need to understand this to take advantage of the fact that you can embed your brand in an emotionally compelling context that uses this close relationship. And then one final learning is all around brand experiences. Now, we need to understand that experiences with the brand, whether they're direct or indirect, such as advertising, are the engine of close consumer brand relationships. I'm going to show you a couple of heat maps, and the way we look at it is on the horizontal, we look at the impression that the experience gives of the brand, and on the vertical, the memorability of the experience. So what we find is that TV ads are still very strong. They are alive and well with Gen Y. And I think you've seen that in a couple of the other sessions. Gen Y may look at TV a little bit differently in terms of their habits, but very powerful medium for reinforcing strong brand relationships. Social experience, whether online with networking or offline with friends and family, and also with things like customer service reps, very powerful, very important. And then finally, online activity, brand websites and online search. So what about when a Gen Y consumer doesn't like your brand, when it's either a casual or weak or even at-risk relationship? What media are most impactful in helping you get to positive? What we've seen is a couple of the most important channels are the brand website and also magazine ads. Now, if you think about it, both of these give more detailed information about your brand than some other channels. So a consumer who is maybe a little bit skeptical about your brand can kind of dig in, investigate a little bit, and maybe come away with a more positive perception of your brand. Two other channels, of course, social networking and offline conversations. All of these, by the way, really go across, these learnings go across categories, but it's important for you to look at your own category to see what Gen Y consumers are going to be most receptive to. So for example, in the beverage category, Gen Y reacts very positively to out-of-home advertising. So to wrap up, the message really is, guys, don't be left behind. What Kathy said about the tipping point is here. So you need to harness, you have the opportunity to harness the passion of Gen Y to develop compelling messaging about your brand. But do not be inauthentic. Stay authentic, because they smell inauthenticity a mile away, and their positive passion will quickly turn into negative passion, which they will then communicate across the internet. And lastly, we do have an opportunity to leverage that close connection of Brand Y with their parents in order to create a win-win for the brand and for consumers. The time is now. Thank you.